When we picture Thomas Edison, our minds usually go straight to that sanitized public school image of the benevolent wizard of Menlo Park. We see this solitary, tinkering genius working late in a softly glowing laboratory, just trying to bring light to a darkened world. But if we actually dig into the historical records, the reality has a much, much sharper edge. In today's Explainer, we're going to peel back that mythology. We're looking at Edison's cutthroat business tactics, his fierce ambition, and his absolute relentless pursuit of market dominance. Okay, let's dive into this, because to truly understand the man, we really have to ask ourselves a pretty tough question. Was his greatest invention the light bulb, or was it actually the modern corporate monopoly? As you'll see, Edison didn't just want to invent the future, he wanted to own it completely, and he was more than willing to crush anyone who stood in his way. Section 1. The Scrappy Hustler. From train tracks to tycoon. Edison's drive started incredibly early. We're talking about a kid who wasn't sitting in formal schooling. Instead, his entrepreneurial spirit kicked in at just 12 years old, selling newspapers on trains. And after a childhood train accident left him partially deaf, he didn't let it stop him. He just learned to tune out distractions and became an absolute scrappy hustler. This intense obsession with practicality crystallized early on for him. Actually, his very first patented invention was a legislative vote recorder. It worked perfectly, but politicians absolutely hated it because it stopped them from delaying votes, and it nearly bankrupted him. From that moment on, Edison made a cold, calculated decision, summed up perfectly by the quote we see here. If an invention didn't have commercial demand, meaning if it couldn't make money, it simply wasn't worth his time. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale of this number. After moving to New York completely broke, Edison managed to fix a broken gold indicator telegraph for a major Wall Street firm. He then improved their stock printing system so effectively that Western Union offered him a staggering $40,000. To put that into perspective, that's roughly equivalent to $1 million today. For a young guy who had literally just been starving on the streets, this massive payout was the ultimate game changer. It funded the entire empire he was about to build. Section 2. Wizard of Menlo Park, the monopoly maker. So Edison took that early wealth and used it to build Menlo Park in New Jersey. This was the world's first modern research and development lab. It was designed as a literal invention factory to just systematically pump out patents. And looking at this timeline, his factory absolutely delivered on that promise. In 1874, the quadruplex telegraph completely revolutionized communication. By 1877, he stunned the entire world with a phonograph. That's what earned him international fame and the whole wizard nickname. And then boom, in 1879 came the practical incandescent light bulb. This kind of rapid-fire technological output didn't just secure his legendary fame, it attracted immense, heavy-hitting financial backing from Wall Street titans. But behind the curtain of this wizard persona was a fiercely calculated business strategy. Edison rarely worked alone. He hired brilliant assistants to do the heavy lifting of experimenting while he took the patents and the credit strictly under his company's name. Plus, he wasn't always the first one to come up with an idea. He'd often take existing concepts, improve them for commercial use, and then use his massive wealth to just buy out his competitors, like the British inventor Joseph Swan, who he eventually merged with just to avoid a fight. And if a competitor wouldn't sell, Edison aggressively sued them into the ground to protect his monopoly. Section 3. The War of Currents. The rivalry begins. Now, as Edison tried to electrify the entire world, he finally met his match. And it was in the form of a brilliant young Serbian immigrant who had just started working at his company, Nikola Tesla. Edison promised Tesla a massive $50,000 bonus if he could redesign and fix his inefficient motors. Tesla worked tirelessly, and he delivered exactly what was asked of him. But when he went to collect the money, Edison literally laughed in his face with the infamous line you see here, brushing off the promised payment as an American joke. Feeling completely scammed and betrayed, Tesla quit right on the spot, and that moment triggered one of the most bitter, world-changing rivalries in history. And this brilliantly illustrates what the rivalry was actually all about. Edison had staked his entire empire on direct current, or DC. But DC had a pretty fatal flaw. It was expensive, and it could only transmit power within about a 2-mile radius. You'd literally need a power station every few blocks. Tesla, on the other hand, championed alternating current, or AC. AC was vastly superior for large-scale grids because it could blast high-voltage electricity over hundreds of miles. Tesla quickly partnered up with the industrialist George Westinghouse, and suddenly, they presented a massive existential threat to Edison's DC monopoly. Section 4. The Propaganda Machine. Protecting the Monopoly. Deeply threatened by Tesla and Westinghouse's undeniably superior AC tech, Edison's investors started getting really nervous.
He knew he couldn't just invent his way out of this problem, so he went down a really dark path. The escalation of his ruthless tactics here is genuinely shocking. To convince the public that AC power was a deadly threat, he launched this macabre smear campaign. He actually paid local kids to collect stray animals from the streets and then staged horrific public demonstrations using AC electricity to execute dogs, horses, and famously, even an elephant, which he made sure to capture on film. He was desperate to brand alternating current as a killing machine, purely to protect his own market share. Edison, a guy who was historically an opponent of the death penalty, then crossed yet another line. When the state of New York was looking for a so-called humane method of execution, Edison secretly funded and advised the creation of the very first electric chair, and he purposefully ensured that the chair was powered by a Westinghouse AC generator. He even instructed his lawyers to try and popularize a new term for being executed in the chair. He literally wanted people to say the criminal had been Westinghoused. This gruesome PR stunt culminated in the execution of William Kemmler, which was horribly botched and left the public totally traumatized, though it ultimately failed to stop the rise of AC power. Section 5. Ousted by Wall Street. The corporate betrayal. Let's move to and see how this builds into an ultimate irony for Edison's ruthless quest. His stubbornness over direct current and the massive amounts of money he spent fighting the current war left his company financially vulnerable. That made him the absolute perfect target for his own primary investor, J.P. Morgan. Morgan built a completely different kind of monopoly. He was an inventor, he was a consolidator who absolutely hated the inefficiencies of corporate competition. Seeing that Edison was clearly losing the war to AC, Morgan just stepped in. He orchestrated a hostile merger, forcing Edison's company to combine with one of their biggest alternating current rivals, Thomson-Houston. By 1892, this aggressive move ended the War of the Currents and created an absolute behemoth that controlled 3/4 of the American electrical industry. And in a final, brutal corporate betrayal, Morgan just stripped Edison's name from the company entirely. Edison General Electric simply became General Electric. Edison was bitterly alienated, essentially forced out of the very electrical empire he had built from the ground up. He had completely lost the war to the AC system. Section 6. A complicated legacy. Expanding the empire. But while Edison lost his grip on the electrical grid, his cutthroat business philosophy definitely survived. He walked away with immense wealth and just pivoted into entirely new industries, where he continued his aggressive tactics, most notably in the early days of motion pictures. He made sure he held the vital patents for cameras and projectors. Over his lifetime, Edison hoarded a staggering 1,093 U.S. patents. That number represents far more than just scientific curiosity, it represents sheer financial stakes. He systematically used the patent office not just to protect his own inventions, but as a weapon to completely control emerging markets, aggressively suppressing competition at every single turn. So, the crucial point is how these tactics shaped our modern world in totally unexpected ways. Edison's motion picture patent monopoly was so suffocating, and his lawsuits against independent filmmakers were so aggressive that those rival filmmakers actually fled across the entire country. They moved to a small, sunny suburb in California just to get as far away from Edison's lawyers as physically possible. By trying to monopolize the film industry, Thomas Edison inadvertently forced the creation of Hollywood. His methods, patent trolling, hostile PR, and crushing the competition, literally laid the exact blueprint for modern corporate warfare. And that leaves us with a truly fascinating paradox. We live in a world illuminated and connected by the very industries he helped birth. Yet, his incredible drive to monopolize often stifled the very innovation he claimed to champion. So, as we look back at the legacy of the man who conquered darkness, we have to ask ourselves, was Thomas Edison a genius who built the modern world, or a ruthless tyrant who, in his quest for absolute dominance, actually held it back? It's definitely a question worth pondering the next time you flip a light switch.